welcome. How are we?
Very well. Thank you very much for having me here today.
No, Andrew, it's an absolute pleasure and I appreciate you giving up your time. So, as well as being a husband and father, the most important roles first, you're also VP of Sales for HPE. We are going to talk about HPE a bit later on in this, probably the last third of the podcast. But the real reason you came in today, you very graciously agreed to share quite a difficult period of your life over the last 12 months or so. Not only for you, but for your family, a real challenging period. But with that challenge is also brought you, I think it's fair to say, a passion.
Yes.
A passion for knowledge, what we're going to talk on today, and a new way of living your life. So I guess if we can say every cloud has a silver lining, it seemed like quite a, you've paid quite a fee to get that knowledge, I'll say, but you've certainly made the most of it. So you're going to tell this story much better than I can. So let's go back in time. Life's going swimmingly. You're full out at HPE. What happens?
So it probably started, Danny, about 4 or 5 years ago. I was diagnosed with the umbrella term of IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. I'd say bobbing and weaving on different levels of medication, suffering some quite extreme side effects at times. And I know I'm not alone out there. I know many people suffer from that. Going back about a year ago today, the symptoms I started to experience were a lot worse. They got to the point where they were quite debilitating. I went from, over a period of about probably 8 months, I went from 92 kilos down to 62 kilos. I was suffering quite extreme side effects. They were debilitating in terms of where I could go, traveling, obviously being a husband and father, it was debilitating in terms of work. I kept the head down, kept going. Obviously was in and out of hospital, was doing my checkups and all the things there. But it led to a point where I, in October, ended up in the back of an ambulance, and the conditions and the underlying side effects had hit, I'd say, fever pitch. Ended up in hospital.
You were down in London at this point as well, weren't you? You were away from home.
I was away from home. I managed to get back up the road and eventually back into hospital, and I had great healthcare and great support from many different people. Some of the big things that happened to me was actually a doctor that sat me down and said to me that your body is screaming at you. You know, we don't know essentially what's happening underneath. We don't know the kind of what's causing it more than anything. Why the weight loss? Why the passing of the blood? And I couldn't retain food. I really had quite a hard time of just functioning on my everyday. And at that point, the doctor sat me down and said, "Your body's screaming to stop. You need to stop. You need to give us time to start to investigate this and to get to the bottom of it." That same day, I also sat down with a dietitian, and a real big awakening moment. With the dietitian used an analogy with me that really, really struck me. And it struck me in many ways. And that analogy was, if I was to have one car for the rest of my life, what would I do with that one car? So of course you get thinking about this car. I'm thinking, I'm going to put it in a garage. I'm going to make sure it gets waxed. I'm going to make sure it gets washed regularly. I'm going to make sure it gets serviced. I'm going to make sure that the premium fuel goes into that car. I'm going to make sure that the oil's done regularly. Make sure that everything is kept prim, proper. Make sure that I drive it properly. All of those great things. And she said to me, "Why do you not pay your own body that same gratitude, that same input?" And it really got me thinking. And you mentioned I work for HPE. One of the things that I do in professional career is that any job I've ever done or any team I've ever ran, I always talk about taking the sporting analogy of winning in 1s, 2s, 5, 10%, whoever those percentages might be. How can we set ourselves a high standard? How can we work with our customers and partners to improve their standards? And then all of a sudden I thought to myself, I'm applying these really high standards in my professional career. I'm pushing my teams to do the same. But I was not doing the same with my own body. I was not looking after myself very well. In some areas I was. And that day, Danny, that was the day that ignited me to really go and start researching. And whether it was 1%, 2%, 10%, and of course this is on top of all the wonderful healthcare that we have in Scotland and beyond. But that ignited me to go and start my research.
I think in terms of, obviously, I know your story, and I think it's probably worth highlighting, you sort of glossed over how bad it was. During that period, you feared for your life at times, didn't you? It got that bad. At one point, you thought it might be cancer. At one point, you didn't know if you were going to kind of make it through the month at that point. So that real dark times during that period.
100%. As you mentioned, I was down in London. I got a phone call that effectively said, you take all the conditions. My average heart rate was way up at 67, which has been high for me. My immune system was battered. I had every cold and everything going under the sun. My body was badly swollen, even up into my face, my chest, everywhere. And I got a phone call that said that you need to get into hospital. You're flagging red alert for, it was actually multiple cancers at that stage. Mm-hmm. And I remember vividly on the way home thinking, what have I left for my kids? What about my wife? What about, so many things were racing through my brain about, what next? And I got home and then I actually collapsed the next day and passed out. And that's when I ended up in the ambulance. And that's when it really got to fever pitch. I thought I was dead at that point when I was in the back of the ambulance.
Mm-hmm. And we all know we've got a certain length of string within this world, but when you're faced with a finality of it's not as long as I thought, it really focuses the mind. The mental pressure that must put on you as well can't be underestimated. So you find yourself in a scenario where your body's failing you. You're out of control. You don't know why your body's failing you, and ultimately your head does go to the worst place at that point, saying, "Well, I'm done." So the mental aspect of that and the fortitude that you must have seen, and clearly your wife, your family, and your support structure around you are an important part of that.
100%. It took me to physically, obviously, a very bad place, mm-hmm. and then quite quickly, it was that day where I made the decision to fight. And what I mean by fight is to go and learn everything I could to get those incremental gains. In terms of support, my wife, my kids, and many of my colleagues in HP, many of my friends were absolutely first class in terms of the support, the guidance, listening to me, talking to me, keeping me updated. It was very, very difficult as well to go from a high pressure environment where you're really busy, but I love that busy. I love driving outcomes for our customers and our partners. And then all of a sudden that got switched off. And all I could think about was, to your point, am I going to survive? How am I going to survive? And that's all I could think about at that point.
One of the other guests who's been on here, Chuck O'Brien, the CTO at DAV and a friend, he actually talks about his biggest fear was what quality of life would he have, as opposed to he said something to me one time when he was in hospital. No, it will stick with me for the rest of my life. There's worse things than death, Danny. And I was like, God, right, okay. And his biggest fear was what standard of life am I going to have if I'm hanging about? And I guess that would have been a concern as well.
It was a concern as well. And I knew that there was the output of it was effectively going to be, to your point, what's it going to debilitate? In my job, I travel a lot. I like to be physically active. Obviously 4 kids, 3 dogs as well, which obviously keeps you very, very active. So with all of those things, it was racing through my mind of, what's the output going to look like?
Yeah.
Very, very stressing, very challenging. And there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information out there which conflicts with itself. And that also was a challenge. to get good advice, particularly on food and diet, I found really quite a challenge to get to the bottom of.
Absolutely. So you then started this process. You decided that you weren't going to go without a fight, and decided that you had to take control. And if it's the 1s and 2%, I think it's worth highlighting. At this point, by no means were you an unhealthy person. You weren't a heroin addict. You weren't living life to the max. You were the standard working exec. Lots of hours, eating in restaurants, late nights, hotels, travel. These things do take a toll. But out with that, I guess at the time you thought you were eating okay. You thought you were exercising enough. So it wasn't like you had an absolutely horrific lifestyle.
Definitely not. Particularly at home, my wife's a chef, so very, very lucky and very privileged with that, and that all the meals that I ate, she's Italian as well, so that also sets the standard very, very high. Lots of pasta, lots of great meals. So particularly when I was at home, I was eating really well, was exercising really well. But to your point, when I was travelling, there was a lot of things where, I was perhaps eating on the go and taking the easy option quite a lot of the time, eating late, a lot of things that I didn't realise were impacting me quite significantly, and that was very much a learning journey. So yeah, before I would have said that I would have thought on paper I was very healthy, but beforehand, average heart rate is 67.
Which isn't terrible.
No, it's not. It's not. But fast forward to today, with the changes I've made, my average heart rate's dropped to 45.
Wow. That's almost become a problem the other way. So you said that the kind of aha moment was when you spoke to the doctor and the dietitian. So talk us through the process and ultimately where you've got to.
So from a process perspective, was research, and I started picking up books that were recommended by probably people out in social media that were highlighting areas of concern, areas of I'd say some of them were potentially quite controversial, but I break it down to 4 main pillars, and the first pillar that I'm very, very strict on is diet. So from a diet perspective is effectively anything that goes into my body and anything that I eat. And I'd probably summarise it by saying it's what my granny told me to eat. She's no longer with us, but she'd be telling me, I told you so. So she would always say, eat local, eat in season, go and make your own food, use the raw ingredients that are around you. So quite basic stuff. So that's one of the biggest learnings that I've certainly taken, is that making your own food from local sources, it's also been fun. You go into local farms and things like that. I do eat out of supermarkets as well, but I just find it nice to, maybe on a Saturday, to go make a nice meal, in particular out from somewhere there. When I'm on the go, that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging, right? When I'm on the go, I guess what I've learned with that is probably a bit like Italian cooking. So Italian cooking, my wife will always say, it's about using minimal core ingredients. And for me, that's the same when I'm eating out. I look to understand what's going in the food. And for me, that's trying to reduce the amount of processed foods that I'll eat. I definitely don't tolerate those very well. When I was going through a lot of the testing, I was advised to try a diet. So that diet was called low FODMAP. So my
low FODMAP?
FODMAP.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it is effectively fructans. It's certainly not a health practitioner, but it's the way that certain people's body react to fructans. And they can be in things like apples, bananas, fruits, potatoes. And the way that I would see it is effectively elimination diet. So you get a red, amber, green. You go through a number of weeks where you have to eat only greens. And then what you do is you start to introduce and keep a food diary on the ambers. And then you do the same again with the reds until you find out what are your trigger points. So I've done that to quite a degree now. So I know exactly what foods I can and can't eat or can't tolerate.
Was there any surprises within that food?
Yeah, it's big style. So surprises and probably angst in the family. So garlic and onions.
Oh my God. The staple.
Yeah, staple. Mm-hmm. To my wife's absolute horror, she was not happy when I cut it out. I noticed a big gain, significant gain. The swelling in my body went down. Noticed real big improvements. And what happened at the end of that was that my wife was like, I'm not having this. I've got to find a way around this. So then she started on the research. So she's worked out ways that I can actually have garlic oil. So if you fry the garlic in the oil, dispose of the garlic, and then there's alternatives to onions. So spring onions I can have.
Wow.
And there's a herb called asafoetida, which I can have. Even things like apples. I can't tolerate apples. So it's very, very kind of, I'd say, a normal, regular food. But I've discovered some strange and wonderful things in there. And my wife actually has built up she's created her own recipe book. And I'm really pushing her to publish it.
She absolutely should. There'll be loads of people listening to this thinking, I need to understand more. I think dietary problems are becoming a massive part of society. So there was a book the last time we spoke that you recommended I read.
Yes. So Chris Van Tolkien, ultra processed people.
Ultra processed people. So I've been listening to that in audiobook, and it's absolutely fascinating, stroke terrifying.
Yes.
The history of some of the most consumed ingredients on the planet, coming from chemical war factories, coming from waste products from coal extraction. So all these things that you're absolutely horrified to do. And one of the bits that really resonated within that was the elimination of ultra processed foods had a bigger impact in weight and health than calorie control. So you can eat a low calorie, high processed food, or you can eat naturally high fat foods, and the control group drastically was healthier on the natural high fat.
100%. So I can eat, although I am exercising again.
Yeah.
So I've actually since the age of like 14, I've lifted weights, and I've always been just enjoy it. It zones my mind out, enjoy the benefits of it. But from an ultra processed perspective, I would say it's hard to put a percentage on it, but I try and eliminate it entirely. I'll never get there. Because
so what would you define as an ultra processed food? Because it's actually surprising what is classified as ultra processed food. People think of the grim stuff, the processed meats, but it's actually almost in everything.
It is very much everywhere, or it can be everywhere if you don't know how to look for it. Mm-hmm. So I think the official is 5 ingredients or more. Is what they call ultra processed. So there's obviously a difference between processed foods where you can go to a nice restaurant, you can buy a meal that's processed. You can buy a ready-made meal. You can buy healthy ones. There are healthy ones out there. That's processed. But when it's 5 ingredients or more, it's ultra processed. But it's one of the surprising things for me with an ultra processed. If I go back to, I was probably advised 4 or 5 times to go on this low FODMAP diet. So the big mistake that I made was avoid this, avoid that. So, but then what I was making the mistake of was I was then replacing those things with ultra processed foods. So I was drinking kind of meal supplements or protein powders that were full of these ultra processed foods, and it was absolutely very clear that my body was not tolerating them. Fast forward to today, I mentioned my heart rate, obviously down to 45. It is quite low, but obviously having cut those foods out, I've been asthmatic since the age of 2, 3. I can't remember when. I always remember carrying 2 inhalers everywhere I go. in my bag, in my pocket. You know, even going into a room, I'd know where those inhalers are, just in case. I would know what my triggers were. And fast forward to today, and I touch wood in saying this, since I've made the changes that I've made, my asthma has gone.
Wow.
Entirely, which is the first time in my whole entire life. And I actually didn't notice for 4 months. And then my wife said to me, "Where's your inhalers?"
No idea.
I didn't have a clue. Couldn't find them. So, you know, big change from that perspective. Ultra processed foods as well. I'd also say, going back to the Italian thing on ingredients, you know, if you go to read a label, and if you want to know if ultra processed foods are in them, if you don't recognise the ingredient,
phosphate, something or other, yeah. Uh-huh.
There's a great chance that it's ultra processed and it's potentially laced with alternatives to food.
No, I was saying about anything that claims to be low fat is probably ultra processed, or has health benefits is probably ultra processed, and you've got me being one of these weirdos now who stand in the supermarket and I'm looking at stuff. Also, my children have a real problem with you because they actually have a section on Cocoa Pops within the book, which was my youngest son's absolute favourite. Now, we know they were a treat, but when you actually listen to the chapter on Cocoa Pops, so they've been banished, so if you ever see them, you might have, there might be an accident. So, in terms of diet, that was one of the main pillars that you went on. But there's another 3 that you've added next to that. So what are they?
There is. So the other one, I'd say the next biggest one is relaxation, number 2. Relaxation, I'm a high energy person. I like to do everything with, you know, everything I've got, you know, family, friends, work. So if I reflect back the way, relaxation was not something I was particularly good at. And that's something I was forced to find, if I'm honest with you. NHPE, they do a wonderful job around promoting mental health. We have mental health first aiders. We have, you know, awareness campaigns. And one of the things that they give us as part of being an HP employee is access to an app called Headspace. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm, you know, physically in a dark place, mentally, this is really challenging me. So I thought I'm going to try meditating every day. I tried it towards the end of the day because I wasn't sleeping particularly well. Obviously, a lot of stress through those points. So finding the art of relaxation has been a big one for me. So meditation, you know, 2 years ago, I'd have laughed at you if you'd have said, you know, I was sitting saying I meditate today. It's something I do every day now. So just to zone out towards the end of the day. Another thing I found with relaxation was actually a strange find. I was reading about, I was on a lot of medication particularly for my body swelling and some of the reactions that I was going through. The doctors were saying, you're going to have to come off these because they're going to cause damage in other areas. So at that point, I was thinking, well, how else do I keep the swelling down? How else do I kind of look after myself, you know, without the kind of high levels of dosage of medicine that I was on? And one of the things I come across was ice baths or ice dipping. So I thought, oh no, this is not me. I'm not so sure about this. So I invested in an ice pod, so like an ice bath, one of these pop-up things you put in your back garden. And I took some advice from a colleague who does it regularly, and jumped into this ice bath. And I started off at, you know, just a minute, just kind of working my way up. And I can now say I'm absolutely hooked on it. And I do it every day. So I do it for 2 main reasons. The first reason I went to do it was to reduce the inflammation in my body, to try and keep that inflammation down. But from a relaxation perspective, the mental clarity that going into the cold water gives me, so clear, so clear. And I'm definitely inspired. And obviously you need to make sure you do it safely and all those things there. But
so is it a morning thing or is it a?
So I do it in the morning.
Yeah.
The other reason I do it in the morning is whenever I get out, probably about 5 minutes after, you get the kind of the rush. Mm-hmm. You get that that real big endorphin push. So a typical morning routine for me: wake up in the morning. I used to pick my phone up, and that'd be me straight into work mode. Even from 5:30 in the morning, early doors. What have I got on today? What am I doing? Find myself dipping in. Even if it's 20 minutes, I make sure I start my day offline. I'll have a coffee. I'll try and go outside, and then I'll dip in the tub. So that's pretty much straight away. I'll come out. I'll do some form of exercise, depending on what the calendar's like and what the day's got ahead of me. It could be as basic as just going out for a walk, or lifting weights, which is something obviously I really, really enjoy. So the art of relaxation for me has been an interesting journey, and I'd really challenge people to say, are you investing in yourself from a relaxation perspective, particularly in the world of all things digital? We spoke about the way that a mobile phone, you might even just think, did it go in my pocket? Mm-hmm. Was that
chipping away?
Yeah, it's chipping away. So when I do my relaxation, I'll lie down on the floor in the living room at the end of the day. I'll stretch off. I'll then do my meditation. But there won't be any digital devices on at that point, and I'll completely zone out.
It's it must take real discipline to do that as well, because when you're a busy person, especially life gets in the way. If we are both in a sales role ultimately. It doesn't matter how fancy the job titles are, you're there to sell. You're coming to end of quarter, end of targets, these things keep on coming at you. And to make sure you make the time. So rather than say, right, I'm going to work to 12 o'clock, then I'm beat, so I'll just go to my bed, then I'll get up at 5, I need to go again. There is a lot of discipline to say, no, actually, I'm not going to do that.
So there has to be a lot of discipline. I think in the past I would have done that. I would have worked to 12 o'clock, I would have got up at 5 o'clock, I'd be straight online, a coffee in between, but I absolutely would have done that before. But what I realised is that I was not at my best. Mm-hmm. Today, I am at my physical and mental peak that I've ever been in my adult life. And even with all the kind of the stresses and strain of life, I feel I'm ready to take on anything.
Yeah, it's about output, isn't it, rather than quantity?
Yes.
And I have a funny way of looking at your day. You're basically you're a battery, and you've only got so much energy within that day, and it's up to you if you start that day fully charged, half charged, or running on the fumes. And I would much rather have a very productive 6 hours than a slog of 12 hours just to be seen to be slogging away.
100%.
And you can keep going for longer that way.
You can be stupid busy, or you can be productive busy, and get things done that have a true impact on people's day, your own day, your own week. But I definitely agree with you there on the battery. So, which probably leads to the next pillar, which is sleep. From a sleep perspective, we've got loads of data on business, and this is an interesting one as well. When I look at the financial controls we put in place around what we're doing, why we're doing it, when we're doing it by, how does that impact a customer, how does that impact a partner? The realms of data is infinite in terms of what we use. And okay, I don't apply that amount now, but I definitely use data in terms of how I sleep, how I'm exercising, and at least once a week I'll make sure I sit down and I take a look back to see how I've been sleeping, and the aspects there. On sleep, I learned a lot on sleep, a significant amount, and it's probably an area I'm still learning on. I think learning all the pillars, but that's the third most important one for me. I run to a thing called an 8-3-2-1. So 8 is I stop having caffeine 8 hours before I go to bed. The 3 is I will have my last meal at least 3 hours before I go to bed. And that's because typically when you go to bed, if you eat before you go to bed, your body it's not as efficient at obviously processing that food. My stomach is damaged, and I'm obviously less fortunate, I guess, to have that in place. So I make sure that I eat that nice and early to allow it plenty of time to digest. 2 hours no fluids, and then 1 hour. I'm not as good at that one, but blue light. I'm probably 30 minutes, at least before I go to bed, to turn off a phone, turn off the TV, and that's when I do the kind of the relaxation aspects at the back end of the day. I try not to get too uptight on day to day, because you're going to get days where you don't sleep as well.
Nope.
But if it averages out over the week, then that's the way that I measure my sleep just now.
Yeah, sleep's everything. Certainly thinking back to when my children were ultra young, you can deal with anything on a full night's sleep. But as soon as you're sleep deprived, the world is a harder place. The
sleep deprivation is, particularly as you say, when you think back to when the kids are young, I do not function very well.
It's one of the most efficient forms of torture as well, apparently, sleep deprivation. So the final pillar?
Yeah, and the final pillar is exercise.
Exercise.
So it's probably a final pillar. That final pillar from an exercise perspective was something I was good at before, but it's something I've learned to get better at. So quite often, particularly in a lot of, I'm sure I'm not alone here, a lot of people's roles, they're spending a lot of time behind a computer, particularly being desk-based. I think number one from an exercise perspective is relearning the art of movement, and just making sure that even if it's short movements during the day, I aim to get 10,000 steps a day. So it doesn't always happen, but again, I look to average that out across the week. But just look to get movement in the day from an exercise perspective. On that, I'd say, when you can, get back out to nature, get away from those digital screens. I think it's great for your well-being to reconnect with nature, get back out. In Scotland, we have the benefit of having one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Of course, I'm biased, but it's really encouraged me to get out more and explore more time in our wonderful, beautiful country, and on that side of things.
It's good for the soul outdoors, isn't it?
Absolutely brilliant. I think
there's more to that than actually just it's about headspace. I think it's probably going back to a time past when we spent all of our time out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why, going back to the cold dipping or just connecting this back, I did initially try the cold showers. It was good, but I wanted to be outside if I could, and really wanted to be out in nature, and take in the oxygen, take in the breaths that I could as well.
Uh-huh.
From an exercise perspective, so I because I was kind of limited on stomach, I was wanting to try and give my stomach, or I was advised to try and give it as much stability as possible. So I lift weights, do that kind of 3 times a week. I don't do massive amounts of cardio. That's probably through choice. I don't find it as rewarding.
And yet your resting heart rate's plummeted. And
yes.
You would normally find to get a resting heart rate, you would focus on cardio and that type of movement.
Yeah,
it just shows you that there's more to it.
100% in a big way. So that's it. I'm actually going to start doing reintroducing cardio now, just to see how I got on. But obviously I need to just be cautious just how my stomach reacts to it, my bowel reacts to it, just to make sure that I don't overdo it. But it's very interesting. When you compare it to some athletes' levels of heart rate, that mine is as low as that.
No, that's absolutely incredible. So these 4 pillars, how I guess that's been a kind of year-long process that you've been going through. So the overall health prognosis now, you look great.
Thank you.
So are you still on medication?
So I'm still on medication. I will get checked regularly. But I would say that I've got to a point where I've got good control over things, which is good. I will keep very disciplined on those 4 pillars. I think on those 4 pillars, I'll stick to that morning routine, that evening routine, and particularly that end of week check-in from a data perspective, because those are the things where I'll course correct. Am I doing my morning routine? Am I doing my evening routine? Because by doing that morning routine, that evening routine, I know I'll be at my physical and mental peak. I'll be at my absolute best for my wife, my kids, my job, whoever I'm going to be dealing with on a weekly basis. That will be absolute. I'd say they're immovable objects that I've built into my calendar on a daily basis.
It's amazing how easily things can start to slip, isn't it? It's you miss something one week, then the next week it's another day, then before you know it, you've moved right back.
Exactly. And I think for one of the things I wanted to do by sharing this is to inspire other people. And to your point there, this has been a journey. This did not happen overnight. It took time. And for me, if you look at those 4 pillars, the diet, the relaxation, the exercise and the sleep, even if you started to do one incremental thing in those areas that's going to give you upside, that's where I'd look to start, because that's how I did it. And I made a lot of mistakes throughout it as well. I tried a lot of things. I probably read some bad information. Tried some things which just didn't work for me, because that's the other thing I'd say, that
everyone's different.
Yep, everybody's different. They might, some people might listen to this and think that might not work for me, but hey, I might try this. But making sure that I make the time to do those things is going to be my
so for that inspiration point of view. So if someone's sitting there just now struggling with similar type health issues, whether it be bowel or whatever, you said it's basically cured asthma as well. Well, not cured, removed the need to use your inhalers. And they might not be as analytical as you, and they might not have the discipline or the wherewithal to go through this very structured process. What would you recommend? How does someone start if they don't have all the same resources and the analytical approach that you had? But if there was 2 or 3 easy things that you would recommend to somebody, where would that be?
Perfect. So I think first thing I'd say on the diet, one of the big things that I realised was I kept a food diary, and which was quite painful at first, because you had to sit and write everything down. But when you start to write things down and then you add your symptoms in on how you're feeling, and sometimes it could take 2 days, 3 days for me to impact. Having that food diary, I started to correlate really quickly. Hang on a minute, 2 days ago I ate this, and this is the impact. So very, very quickly I could start to spot patterns and trends, and it was quite an easy one to sit down and write a food diary. I think what you said there about, go back to what my granny would say, go back to basics. I don't even count the number of calories that I eat on a daily basis, but my wife jokes about having to feed 2 of me now. I eat more than I ever have done, and I certainly probably eat a lot more than the average person on a daily basis. Okay, I do train, but I eat natural ingredients and homemade ingredients, so that'd be the second one. 1, keep a food diary. 2, think about homemade cooking. What are you doing to make sure you're getting homemade cooking? And I think the third one is starting to understand what's in your food. Okay, I've went to the extremes to try and cut as much as I can out, but going back to what you said earlier about finding the balance. Your body is that one car for the rest of your life. What are the things that you want to put in it to look after it?
So one of the questions I'm keen to ask, and this is going to probably show a lot about me and my diet. I'm going to give you a bit of a fast fire questionnaire on, can I eat these foods? So pasta.
Yes, I can. I would eat fresh pasta and traditional pasta.
Is there a difference between wholemeal pasta and the white stuff you get at the supermarket?
So I would only eat fresh pasta from ancient grains. So I have discovered.
So what's an ancient grain?
Traditional, non-modified.
Right, okay.
So,
and is that something you can get from the supermarket, or are you making your own at that?
My wife makes her own. Many supermarkets do sell non-modified pasta or fresh pasta, and it definitely makes a big difference for me.
Right, okay. Bread. You can see where I'm going here. I love a carb.
So I will only eat, again, ancient grain and sourdough.
Right, okay. And again, are these available? Well, sourdough bread's available from supermarkets, isn't it? But
it is, but
there's probably stuff in it to make it last longer.
Just read the labels.
Yeah.
So, when you look at sourdough, it should be 3-4 ingredients max. I'm not a cook, not a chef, not a baker, but there should be a minimal amounts of ingredients. And again, can you recognise those ingredients?
Right. Okay. All meats, fine.
All meats. Trying to think them through. Yes, I eat all meats, all
Pork.
fishes, pork. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And what about? Because just listening to that book, they were kind of going off on things like even like standard Hillman's mayonnaise. You think a full fat version of that, but again, ingredients like that, avoid.
So I go for, I do eat mayonnaise, but I make sure I know what it's a good quality mayonnaise. So
it's absolutely fascinating. I feel like you're just starting this journey into health, so I look forward to catching up with you. And you've already got me and my family thinking about it as well, so you hope to inspire people. You certainly have.
Good. No, that's the aim, that's the intent. I want to inspire people to look after themselves and be the best version of themselves, and hopefully they can learn something that
we'll get you out on the speaking circuit, doing TED Talks. So one thing I always like to try and do when I've got guests in here is to try and get a bit of free consultancy. So you're kind of trapped here. You need to answer the questions, so I might as well try and get my money's worth. You're renowned for building really high performance sales teams. I know a lot of the people who work with you and work for you, and one thing that kind of comes across time and time again, they speak very highly of you in terms of how you build teams and how you motivate the teams. And I'm starting to see some certain personality traits from the people that you've employed, some good, some bad, going through that. I'm an accidental salesperson, so I started off as a hardcore techie. I'm really far in the weeds, and through various twists of fate, I've ended up being a kind of accidental managing director and accidental sales lead, and I absolutely love sales. I'm fascinated with it. It's probably one of the most interesting, hardest things to do in business. Always thought it was easy, but one of the things I really struggle with is hiring salespeople. I've made every single sales mistake in the world, from your big expensive sales team who say they're going to come in and deliver you this massive number, who never do, to hiring more inexperienced people, but again, the amount of effort you put in. So every single mistake I've made. So when you're going through that initial process, when you're sitting down in that interview, and interviews I think are a terrible way to assess somebody in the first place, what are you looking for? So
a great question. So I guess first of all, thanks for the feedback. We always look to continue to grow and aspire to do better. So I'll certainly take any feedback offline as well about the teams that we've got. I think that number one is culture, right? I've got a cultural blueprint which I've built with the teams. It's not something I've dictated. It's something that's been evolving over the years, and that cultural blueprint is very, very key. So that includes, multiple facets, inclusion and diversity of thought, of opinion, of background. That's key to building high and successful and high performing teams. But from an interview perspective, one is a cultural aspect to see whether are they going to be a fit within our organisation, and are they going to complement our customers and our partners when they get in front of them. From an interview perspective, I do agree with you, because it is, some people thrive under those conditions falsely as well.
The best interviews I've had, they always turn out to be maniacs.
Really?
Yeah, I see the people you come out and think, oh my God, they were great. They turn out to be loon balls.
Do you know, I've definitely had my share of those as well. There's an interesting one. As part of the interviews, I always like to give a complex problem to that person. I always like to try and be vague on that as well. And the reason why I like to do that is to, particularly in today's environment, we've got the digital world at our fingertips. It's very easy to go and just search for something, right? But actually give something to somebody that's vague, they've got to go and problem solve it. They've got to go and think about it. They've also got to think about it on their feet. So one of the things for me as part of that interview is to get into that. How did they work this problem? How did they get past this vague aspect? Because that's very real. You know, when you get out into customer environment, customer might give you some instructions. They might be vague, but guess what? You got to work your way through them and find out what those things are. So I've made some hiring mistakes as well, definitely along the way. But I think the big ones for me are finding a cultural fit, finding somebody that can work through those complex problem solving pieces. And I've probably worked very well to learn from mistakes, and also going back and looking at the great hires and saying, what do we ask them? And why did that fit? And why did that work?
So quite surprisingly, you've not really spoke anything there about sales background, how they go about selling, very typical sales interviews. Tell us some of your biggest wins, your biggest numbers. Are those things less important to you? I guess they have to be there.
They have to be there. They're staples. I think for me, on that one of my favourite questions is actually asking what their first job was. And for me, that goes back to ethics, you know, how they apply themselves. And you quite often you'll get some people that will say, actually, I'm embarrassed to say that, you know, my first job was a paper round, boy or girl, or type thing. And I love hearing about that. Why did you do it? You know, well, I did it because, you know, I was saving up for a new pair of football boots. Or why were you saving up for a new? And you get to find what ignites people by going back to some of the core basics of what their first job was. And you get to see more of the character coming out. And if I think back to some of the highest performing people that we have in our industry today, I could probably tell you all their first jobs because I remember it vividly, like yesterday. And I can remember them telling me passionately about it. So that's probably one of my favourite questions that I find really quite illuminating and quite effective. But
and how do you, one of the things I see a lot of people struggling with now, and I don't know if it's a generational thing, as you get older you like to think of the good old days, but there's a lot of people struggling with the intensity of sales in terms of, right, well done, you hit your number, what's next month, what's next quarter, you win that deal, great. Picking yourself up from success and disappointment at the same time. It's a relentless pace, and I'm really starting to see a trait of people struggling to maintain that.
It's an interesting one, right? So it's one that I'd say I'm constantly looking to learn on, evolve on. A big one for me, again going back to that cultural piece, is setting high standards on all of ourselves. You know, continually setting that bar, pushing that bar up and up and up. I'm a massive believer in growth mentality, but I'm also a massive believer in making the workplace really fun. Fun's quite a big word, and how do you put the fun into things? You know, for me, putting the fun into the process of engaging our customers, you know, driving our customers and partners to outcomes. You put the fun into that process and you put the reward into that, it certainly makes it easier. I certainly wouldn't say that I've cracked the code on it yet. I'm certainly all ears if other people have cracked the code on it.
You're not getting in from me, I'm afraid. So,
but I think that's a big one. Strong managers is obviously really, really key to that. People who have been through it, people who have got to your point, have made the mistakes. They've learned from those mistakes. They've got the wins. They've felt what it is to feel like to go through those journeys. And I think it's really important to have strong managers to get alongside those people to inspire and motivate them, right? So, but for me personally, going back to the interview process, finding people that have, you know, I don't know if this exists. I always say that, you know, you go back to the kind of kernel in Linux, you know, I kind of joke that people have a sales core. If a person has a sales core and that can be ignited, I can teach them anything. I can help them coach to learn new skills, new attributes. I can help them grow on pretty much anything. If they don't have that sales core,
you're going to struggle.
Big style.
Yeah. And what do you, obviously in a post-COVID era, work from home is a massive part of our industry, absolutely huge. Probably the majority of people now have hybrid working. There's very few people in the office. What's your views on the work from home and how it impacts high-performing teams?
Do you know, I like to say with this one is it's probably trying to find the balance in the middle somewhere. I would say that I certainly enjoy what I enjoy the most, number one. So I always think, where do I get energy from? And this is the same for, I think, for high performing teams. I get energy from being in front of customers, being in front of partners, helping them meet their goals, beat their goals. There's nothing like the rush of a customer or partner saying, yeah, well, we thanks very much for helping us deliver on that. And there's nothing like the human touch for me. I always tell a story about going face to face with one of our big customers. It was just after one of the lockdowns, I forget which one it was. And we went face to face with a senior person and one of the customers. It was myself and the account manager. And we'd planned for the meeting meticulously. Meeting went really well. And at the end of it, he said, hang on a minute. Before you go, you need to go and see X before you leave. Can you spare some time? Next thing we knew, we were in with that person. That person then pulled somebody else in. That happened 3 times. By the time we left that customer site, we'd walked out with 5 things in total that we could solve for that customer. And you could see they were beaming because they had been working remotely, they'd been in the office, and they'd been struggling with these problems. And you could see for them, they could see a way forward with these complex problems and those aspects there. So I do like to tell those kind of beacons or those stories to people around.
Go and see your bloody customers.
100%.
Yeah,
100%. And I think also for high performing teams, when I look across the teams that we've got, they're diverse in their nature. We've got people of all different ages, different backgrounds, and everybody learns at different rates. But it's incredible when you bring a team together and you get them to share their experiences and what they've been learning about their customers, or learning about their partners, learning about what's happening out there in the ecosystem. And it's explosive. And their learning goes up and up and up. So I'm a big, big fan of getting the teams together. But at the same time, I guess the flip of that is there are times when you need to do concentrated work and you perhaps want to just get focused. But for me, I'd rather be out in front of customers and partners.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Andrew, thanks very much for coming in. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll get you back in for an update as when your first book hits the shelves. It'll be sitting here and we can talk about the release of that. But I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you,
All
Gary.
right. Cheers now.